We'll call to order the Watertown Public Works, or the City Council work session agenda for August 16th. We'll ask the finance officer to call roll.
Okay. Bueller. Here. Danforth. Here. Pauline.
Here.
Paulson.
Here.
Shetty.
Here.
Tupper.
Here.
Billhauer.
Here.
Thank you.
Quorum is here. The chair will entertain a motion for the approval of the agenda. Moved by Councilman Bueller.
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Tupper. All those in favor, please say aye. Against, say nay. Motion carried. And now we will move the regular agenda, item A. We'll pass it off to our city manager, Amanda Mack.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to set up our conversation for this evening, first we're going to start with an update on the Downtown Park project. After meeting with all of you a couple of weeks ago, decided that we needed to go back to our friends at Confluence and have them provide us some options that included ice, that included a park without ice, and that included a park with the future possibility of ice. So John and Lyle, I'm not sure if Lyle's on, but John for sure is going to go through where we're at in that process, the different design options, and what we're looking for out of this meeting is a consensus on how, on which option we'd like to move forward for putting out for bids. And then once the bids have been received, council can take final action on either approving or not approving the park to come to fruition. With that, Terry Kelly has provided some preliminary O&M costs that'll be part of the presentation, the PowerPoint that Mitch will pull up here for discussion. And I do have just some clarifying information from Jan at the foundation on the grant that they'll be using to help facilitate the construction of the park. After that, we're going to have our finance officer, Kristen Bobzien, give us a pretty comprehensive overview of the financial picture of all of these capital projects, including some options for bonding the Ice Arena project for discussion, and then we'll finish up with just an update on where we're at with the Ice Arena. Dick is here to help move that conversation forward, and we've laid out sort of the timeline and next steps for making sure that that project comes to fruition. So with that, unless there are any questions for me at this point in time, I'd like to turn it over to John with Confluence and have him kick us off.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Thank you for having me be part of your time today. So based on our discussion with the stakeholder group and city staff, what we did is assembled 3 different current cost estimates based on whether or not the ice is included in the project. So option number 1, we just labeled the no ice rink or synthetic turf option. And in total cost, that project is just under $2.5 million. So what that would achieve is the bulk of the program items that were preferred by the stakeholder group and our committee and working through the public survey. So that includes things like the playground, green area, tree planting, site amenities, the splash pad area, those sorts of things, the stage for public events. So what that does not include, as the name would suggest, is that there is no ice rink or synthetic turf in that option. So that's just under $2.5 million. Option number 2, which we labeled the ice rink and synthetic turf option, that comes down to a total of just a little bit over $3 million currently, $3,032,000. And as the name would suggest, that includes the facilities that would be needed to have a wintertime ice rink, So the rink system itself would be purchased directly by the city of Watertown, but the different facilities that we would need to have that ice and be built as part of the project would be built with it, and that would include the synthetic turf. The reason why the synthetic turf is important, especially when it comes to the ice option, is because we need the turf area to be support for the ice rink, but also, with its continued use, the turf takes a lot of beating. And then when you pull the system off in the springtime, it's going to take a certain amount of time to get the turf, a natural turf or grass, up and running. So it just reduces some of the operations and maintenance costs on behalf of your park staff. So the current cost estimate to do all that work is $3,032,000. And then the third option that we looked at was what it would take to potentially set the project up for ice, but not necessarily build or purchase the ice rink amenities, the temporary ice system, dasher boards, all that sort of stuff. And that cost comes in at about $2.7 million. And what that would include is the synthetic turf that would have to be put in place to eventually have the ice rink if you so choose. So I don't want the synthetic turf is its own kind of discussion point as added value to the project. It is very valuable from use of the park space and events on the stage and in the area. It just is really going to put up with the wear and tear of people going over it all spring, summer, and fall. Obviously makes it a little bit more useful when we have inclement conditions, rain or otherwise. So now that's not to say that you couldn't build the park and come back and include and build synthetic turf later. You certainly could, but that would come at a premium of anywhere from $35,000 to $50,000 additional dollars to get that done, because there's additional earthwork and sub drainage you have to do and working around existing conditions, that sort of stuff. So it just comes at a premium cost to be able to do it later. Overall, these three cost concepts, with ice, without ice, or prepping for ice, don't really change the fundamental design and program as it stands today. As I mentioned, there are all the amenities are there as far as turf, landscaping, decorative fencing to help define areas, a little bit of additional parking, the splash pad, the playground, gathering areas for people, and have it be a well-defined public space that is going to exist between these two redevelopment projects. So with that kind of as a big picture cost overview of the options we put together, I'd be happy to answer questions or discuss anything in more detail.
John, could you share with each of these? So the city several months ago, earlier this year, opted into an option with Jesse Craig to utilize space in his building for the city park for Foundation Plaza. With the addition of ice or potential ice, the need for additional space in that building goes up. So
Sure.
In addition to approving a potential design for bid, the council also needs to understand the ramifications of space needs in the ruins.
Yes, thank you, Amanda. That's an important point. Obviously, was dealing with the part that we're responsible for implementing for you, but based on our work right now, the MOU that the city has with Jesse Craig for square footage within the new development project on the east side is 1,200 square feet. And so that's enough space to put in men's and women's bathrooms, a family bathroom, and a little bit of storage space. What that does not accommodate would be the necessary space to have a warming area for people to come into if they were out ice skating, skate rental room, and in a larger storage area to help facilitate the ice. So based on our programming work in conjunction with Terry Kelly and kind of what we forecasted as needs for that space, that would roughly about double the square footage to go from 1,200 square feet to just about 2,500 square feet. So the cost for that space would have to be accommodated as well if you decided to move forward with that, whether that was through a lease or how those improvements would be paid for. That is yet to be determined. Terry, did you want to add something to that?
No, at this point,
Okay.
I'm in preparation. I know we'll talk a little operational cost. Not at this
Sure.
point.
Okay, no, I just saw your video pop on. So, you could probably support the ice facility with a little bit less than 2,500 square foot, but honestly, just from a pragmatic standpoint, based on the number of users we would see having be in the ice, warming house area, skate rental office, that kind of stuff, 2,500 square feet is really where you would need to be from a square footage support of an exterior rink like that. And the background on the agreement for the 1,200 square feet, I don't have the history on that beyond that was the discussion that was brought about before we were involved in even programming the project.
Thanks, John.
Amanda and Reed, may I ask a question?
Councilman Danforth, go ahead.
How do we, when we have multiple questions here, how do you want to handle that in regards to?
I would grant the latitude to, once you have the microphone, please
through
ask all the questions that you have, and then when you're done, just tell me that you're done, and we'll move on to the next one.
Okay, well, Mayor, I got a number of questions. Surprise, surprise, right?
I think we all expected that.
And,
but
and
that's
to be
all good.
honest, I'm not really sure who, so I'm going to throw them out there, and whoever you guys determine is best to answer that, take that, okay?
Yes, thank you. First, let me see if there is anyone else who's going to testify at the start of this project, or else we'll move into the questions. Is there anyone else going to testify? All right. Councilman Danforth.
Okay, and there's no rhyme or reason to how I got these written down, but TK, Terry, I believe you had supplied a estimated O&M for with ice and without ice, correct?
Yes, I did. It should be in the packet.
Okay, yep. And I believe, Amanda, you were referring to the additional rental space if ice. That's not included in that number, correct?
Correct.
And so if I'm
Correct.
reading this right, the estimation for that, is it an additional 2,500 or is
No,
it?
it'd be an additional 1,300.
So it takes us from 12 up to 25.
Correct.
And that cost is between 15,000 and 19,000 a month? Is that what this says?
I believe it's
I have to look.
annual, I think, too, Mike. I believe that's an annual expense. Heath, our Public Works Director, Vaughn, I can confirm that.
I think it's an annual expense.
Okay, first off, I want to identify our Parks and Rec Director, Terry Kelly, but Director Kelly, could you please repeat what you just said? There were some people talking here, so would you please repeat that, your answer?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I believe that was a typo, and that would be an annual rental rate. And like Director Vaughn, I can probably validate that is not monthly, but rather an annual rental cost.
That is the kind of answer we wanted to hear. Thank you.
Mayor, may I continue then?
Councilman Danforth.
So that number, that 15 to 19, it would then be above and beyond the 227, correct? 227,000? That's noted here for a estimated O&M budget? Okay.
Yes.
So we're 15, okay, so it's addition to that. Terry, Kelly, your estimate does, in either case, are you assuming turf or are you assuming grass in your estimates?
The estimates were based on a synthetic turf product in the main green space. There is numbers in there, Councilman, for turf areas, for the natural grass areas on the outskirts of the property. In addition to any type of turf repairs we do have. A lot of times with the synthetic, you may have to do a cut and replace of a small section. But the assumption when these were done that it would be synthetic in that main area in front of the stage and below the ice if it was to happen.
What is the typical lifespan of the turf in that type of environment?
And we've never had outdoor, but, when Jeremy Herbold's with me and he's helped me research it, we're seeing about that 15-year in outdoor before a total replacement. A lot of the inner membrane, I can't think of, where you put whether it's the rubber or whatever you put to thatch it together. Typically, we'll need additional added throughout the years, but at about a 15-year life cycle, and I believe our consultant, John, you could probably add to that as well.
Yeah, I would, for this type of use, it not being an athletic nature, it would likely, we would use a product that wouldn't have any sort of infill in it. So that wouldn't that wouldn't require maintenance. But for this type of use, we would say anywhere between 15 to 20 years.
Okay, thank you on that. As far as in looking, when I was not on the council, but I believe it was in April or something, that there was a meeting where an additional $1 million was requested. And if I recall, that was for the purpose of adding ice. But yet, if I look at the numbers, the ice really is only adding $500,000. What was the other $500,000? Did you underestimate the costs before? Or what's the reason for the $1 million, but today it's only $500,000?
So, Councilman Danforth, part of that is for the synthetic turf as well. And then there's also associated utility improvements that go along with that as far as sub-drainage. So literally from an estimate point of view, it's hard to just say it. It's hard to classify it as just ice. Off the face of it, it looks like it's $500,000, but it's not. It's actually closer to that $1 million mark by the time you add in those ancillary things like the synthetic turf and utilities. Plus, there was some conversations for typically when we program and design these types of spaces, the speaker system is not part of it. It's all set up to hang a system. So there was about $65,000 in additional AV equipment that's part of that total as well.
Part of the $1 million that was requested, you mean?
Yep, that's correct.
And then I think the last question for now on this issue is, Mr. Kelly, have you done an FF&E budget on with ice versus without ice? And what does that look like?
On a supplemental page, I believe it's attached, and maybe it's not, but the FF&E not included in the base bid that we'd anticipate would be $43,000 without ice. That would be our lawn care equipment, with a smaller ride-on, edger, push mowers, that type of equipment, and an additional $13,000 for UTV. That would just to be able to all maintenance items, setup items around the park area. With ice, that number was $116,000. That encompassed a $65,000 pull behind resurfacer, the same $30,000 lawn equipment, $3,000 rental skates, $5,000 concession equipment, and again, the 13,000 UTV. So you've got 43 without ice, 116 with.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Danforth. Any more questions from the council? Councilman Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess my one question is to Terry Kelly here is, can you or do you feel comfortable taking this added O&M on with your current staff?
Current staff, just transparent, no. We couldn't do it with current staff. And that's where the cost estimate, obviously we can't hire half or 3/4 of a person. But at a minimum, we're looking at 32 hours per week to maintain. And that could be a combination of 1 or 2, but the transparent answer, Councilman, is no, we do not have the staff currently to handle a park of this nature.
Just a kind of a follow-up, not necessarily to Terry, but just in general, is just throwing some numbers out there over a 15-year period, not including the extra costs for the additional space in the building. Over a 15-year period, we're going to be at almost $1.5 million with ice compared to not with ice, which is obviously we have to weigh that, but $1.5 million over 15 years doesn't seem like a ton. But also now we're going to have staff, we're going to have extra building space and maintenance on that. So I guess it's just something that I'm just throwing out there.
Councilman Vilhauer.
Not quite sure where to start in my end either. First of all, it might be helpful because this project has been ongoing for quite some time in the discussion phase and planning phase, to identify some of the members or the members of the committee that were involved in this. I know a lot of time was put in on this, but I think for the public and for some new council members here, it might be helpful to know who some of the key players were on that committee, if someone wants to address that. Or not?
Actually, the chair will, Mr. Jacobson, do you have that list of the volunteers?
I do not have that list handy. I would have
Actually-
to pull that together, Councilman Vilhauer.
I do have it. If you give me some time, I will look it up and answer that. But if anyone else has some questions.
Okay. I'll keep the floor as long as I've got it. I know this project has been talked about for a long time. I think if we go back to the H2O20 work a number of years ago, the charrette that was done a few years ago, this has always been something that has come up as something that we would like to see in our downtown area. I've been a supporter of it as it's worked its way through the channels. And I was on the council back in May, you referenced Councilman Danforth, when we had the meeting that increased the budget to a little over $3 million. That was a tough pill to swallow for those of us that were on the council. I think it was unanimous vote, if I'm not mistaken. Bruce or Reed, do you recall, because you were a part of that as well. That was a tough pill to swallow. Now, what we did not have at that time is we did not have good or really any O&M numbers to go along with it at that time, and I can't help but be somewhat taken aback by the amount of the O&M, and probably shouldn't be, but it is still a big chunk. In hindsight now, I think I still support the project, but I'm in a position where I would support it without the ICE component of it to try to hold down the cost both initially and going forward. So I guess I'll leave off my comments at this point at that then.
Councilmember, the list of committee members I have is Angela Allen, Becky Weber, Amy Carlson, Roger Whittle, Amanda Culhane, Chris Shilkin, Catherine Danforth, Jesse Craig, Brandy Hatton, Heath Von Eye, John and Lyle, and Jessica with Confluence, Angie and John Reppy, Christy Lickey, Joe Turback, Scott McEnroy, Mark Fox, Jan DeBerg, Julie Knutson, Justin Peterson, Terry Kelly, and Vanessa Victor.
We did have a couple of council members too on that, as I recall. I think
Yep.
Councilwoman Manti.
So
and-
this was from the July meeting. It was Councilwoman Manti, Councilman Hoyer, and Councilman Bueller.
Okay, okay. So it was a pretty broad-based group of supporters that worked on this project going back, way back when. So anyway, I just want to get some of those names out there so that the public has some idea who was involved in the planning phase of this.
Councilman Paulson.
I guess I see Jesse's here tonight. I don't know if he'd be willing to speak on this, of what his idea is with his building going up next to it. I wish there was other community members or board members that were here so they could speak to us about it. Because I guess that's what, am I missing something, or was there a specific request behind the ice, or was it just for the fun? That's where I'm missing that.
Well, I think outdoor winter recreation within the plaza was, when they did the community survey around the plaza itself, from the respondents, that came up pretty high on the list. And so and again, I'm speaking from what I've tried to parse together in my short time here. When they started developing the plaza, they really tried to incorporate the top 3 items first, which was stage, programming space, things like that. And then as they got further into it, well, why don't we ask for winter programming? The intent, I believe, is that it's a 4-season park. They want people to be able to use it all 4 seasons, which is why they came back. But to Councilmember Vilhauer's point, you don't know what you don't know. And when you ask to add ice, there's a whole lot of other components. I think it was probably, hey, we could probably do it for another $1 million. So let's see if we can make that happen. And then, in my opinion, those costs just are hard to support.
Yeah, Councilman Paulson, I would add to that. That was a good summary, Amanda. I mean, the ice was brought into the conversation to make sure that the space stayed activated throughout the winter as a public draw and a public amenity. And when it comes to ice itself, these days, especially in downtowns and public areas, you can't just traditionally flood some turf and maintain a quality level of ice through the winter based on the sun power and the associated space around the plaza. That if it was just a traditional flooded rink, that based on our studies, the usable days that we would get out of that rink would be less than 25 days through the winter. So that's the reason why there was a discussion on refrigerated ice and this portable mat system that would be put into place. If you remember, way at the beginning of the project, we were asked to supply some costs for an in-ground permanent refrigerated ice facility that would be able to be refrigerated right on the pavement. And that was another $1 million on top of what we're talking about today. And so obviously at that time, they said that was not within the city's power to be able to do. So that's the reason why the MAT system was brought up during our program system instead, to try to make the ice a bit more, the physical construction costs of the ice a bit more palatable.
Councilman Paulson.
So I guess a follow-up on that is, did we ever do a programming costs or profit analysis of what we plan on doing out there if we were to have ice? And then I know you had hit on the days a little bit of usable days if we didn't do the refrigeration. Looking through the packet, I see that there's a snow machine mentioned, and we live in one of the coldest climates in the United States, and we usually get a lot of snow. So obviously there's going to be probably months that we're not going to be able to use that as a true programming aspect of things. So I guess going back to Terry or Mr. Kelly here, was there a programming aspect to this?
Actually, we're going to, Director Kelly, we're going to let our city manager, Amanda Mack, handle that question.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, the rec department has done some research with other communities who have parks like this. They have put together some possible activities that have very minimal cost to them. Additionally, and this, I wasn't aware of this piece actually until today when I was visiting with Jan at the Community Foundation. So the Community Foundation has also awarded a grant to the WDC in the amount of $75,000. So it's $25,000 over 3 years to help them fund a coordinator position to promote and coordinate events at the plaza. And so they are taking into account making sure that there is at least some part of a person dedicated to programming for the plaza.
Councilman Danforth.
Thank you, Mayor. We've talked about, historically, we've talked about a $500,000 grant from the Watertown Foundation, Community Foundation. Do we know what the terms of that are? I've heard a couple different scenarios there, but I believe that I had heard that it was a $500,000, and I think I've heard 5 years and I've heard 10 years in regards to their participation in regards to the payment. So if somebody could answer that, then I have some follow-up questions.
I did confirm today, so it is a $500,000 gift from the Watertown Area Community Foundation over a 10-year period. And with that, the park will be named Foundation Plaza. And that was discussed in November of 2019 with the City Council.
Okay. If we were to go with this park minus ice, does that change the foundation's participation?
They have not suggested, that it would. From everything I've heard from Jan, even today, they're still in for the $500,000.
They would
yes.
still be in. Okay.
Yep.
So just a couple other questions. You know, this park is going to take one of our parking lots away, and I don't know how many spots are there. There's probably 80 to 100 spots or so there. How do we accommodate for that when we all hear all the time about the lack of parking? So now you're going to take an area here that is going to become a park, which is going to draw people. Where do they park? So that's one question. The other question is, and I'm going to throw it out, and then you can answer them. But how long does it take to prepare the RFQ, the request for proposal, and what cost is there associated to that, and then in the time frame for getting that done? If that makes any sense, I'd like to understand that if I could, please.
I think I'll turn that over to John. I do not have an answer for you on the parking comment. As I wasn't part of a majority of these conversations, but I'm sure it was addressed. And John can lay out the timeline for RFPs and bringing it back to council for approval.
Mr. Jacobson, you're muted.
Sure I am. Thank you. Thanks, Amanda. I'm going to share, we'll start with the parking question first. I'll share with an exhibit that we had that discussion as part of the stakeholder group. And this was, we reviewed this as part of our steering committee meeting back in January of this year, based on some of the conversation that was occurring at that time. So right now in the area that we have bound in red, there are approximately 740 available public parking spaces. So to answer your question, the plaza construction area has about 160 spaces in it. Ultimately, if a smaller lot was to be built to the north between that and the on-street parking lot spaces and the little bit of parking that we have programmed for the alley as part of this project, you would lose in total by the time that vision was done about 65 parking spaces in total would be the ramification from the project. And so this information, Amanda, just in case one of the council members would like to see this slide or its other associated information, that would be included in steering committee meeting number 2 information. And I'd be happy to send it to everybody. So in total, there's 1,025 on-street parking spaces. There's 640 private parking spaces and about 645 on-street parking spaces in this area. So, that's roughly 2,400 parking spaces, which in this type of pedestrian walk environment is actually quite a lot. So then to answer your question about the time to put together the documents to get pricing on this. So essentially what we do, and sorry, I don't mean to insult anyone's intelligence who may already know this, but I just want to kind of just basically talk about it. So essentially the documents that we have to prepare over the next couple months are are the construction documents for the ultimate project based on the bidders. So the potential bidders get those plans, they see what the requirements of the contract are and what sort of facilities that they need to do, and then submit a bid on that, and then obviously construct it. So we would be working through design development of this project and developing those construction documents through November of this year, at which time we would bring that back for council in December and be able to have those bids and have you approve them for award if you saw fit.
Thank you. Councilman Danforth, any follow-up?
But what's the cost, John, to get to that point? What's our cost to get to that point?
Yes, no, thank you. I appreciate that. So right now, your cost to get to that point, Confluence is currently contracted to develop these bid documents and have it bid. Those costs are included in the summary cost memo options that we sent you, but right now our fees for professional design and bid documents is currently $173,800, of which to get to this point we've used approximately about half of that.
Mayor, may I have one follow-up?
Councilman Danforth, yep.
And this is just a throw-out question for everybody here. So if we're looking at this project and if we agree on what we want that to be in regards to the request for proposal, and if the request for proposal nets us costs that are in line with the estimates, aren't we actually with a vote tonight voting on the support of and building of that park? Because if we're not comfortable with the estimated costs, then we should we shouldn't vote for it. So if we're vote for it at some point, whenever that is, and it comes within those estimated dollars or very close to that anyway, the assumption should be that we are in favor of the park. And now that's a question and a comment. So,
City Manager, do you? Oh, our City Attorney Matt Roby. It looks like he wants to speak on this.
And if I may too, I would add one thing to that. The reason why it's important for council to see those numbers again is because likely what we would do is just because of the volatile bid climate that's out there, we would build in a number of ad alternates into the bid, which would be for different parts of the project that add additional value to it that that can be either included in the award or not included in the award to give the city utmost flexibility in selecting that contractor. So there's likely that there would, beyond the base project, there would be some alternates, and one simple one might be we might bid the base project as traditional turf and have an ad alternate to change it over to synthetic turf so that the city can look at what that value to the project is and decide whether or not it's worth it based on the bid result.
City Attorney Roby, did you want to say something?
I guess I didn't specifically ask to say something, but would you like me to comment on Councilman Danforth's statement, or?
Yes, please.
Okay, well, legally, I think that, if there's consensus to go out for bids, I don't think that there's anything stopping the council from rejecting the bids if and when that time happens. There still has to be a formal approval of a contract, and so to the extent that you're free to vote on that as you so choose, there'd be nothing tying your hands. Now, it seems it would be maybe a bit of a waste of time to send it out for RFP if you think you're going to vote no eventually, no matter what the outcome is.
Thank you, Mr. Roby. Councilman Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I'm going to go on record here saying something that some public members may question, but I think we're starting to get too many parks. We're seeing this right now. We have staffing issues consistently with our park system, and either we need to improve that staffing and help them do their job. Or we need to cut down on parks. And maybe it's a combination, and I don't know what that is, and I don't know how the right direction, but it comes into this park because I think this is a huge asset to this community. Our downtown has been rebuilt and is currently being rebuilt. We have tremendous value downtown right now, and I think that this would help, especially all the apartments that are coming down and all the living. I think that this is a huge benefit to this community. So I'm going to support this with ICE because I think that the benefits outweigh the costs, especially the long-term costs. But I do think that it's time to have a discussion to either improve staffing or do something with our parks.
Thank you. Councilman Danforth.
Can I defer to
Councilman Schutte?
Thank you, Mayor. This question may be for John from Confluence, most likely. It's a question on turf because part of this process is ice, but also the turf that go with it, potential turf. And you mentioned synthetic turf or whatever the other natural turf, whatever it was. What about the temperature? Is there, not knowing much about turf, haven't had much use of it myself, but temperature of turf, can some types have be more sensitive to heat and be a lot more hot to the touch and feel versus like in a park setting like this?
So yes, thank you. That's a good question. So synthetic turf, depending upon what the infill is of the material, and like I had mentioned, on this type of turf, we would likely not have a darker infill, a granular material, but it does increase the temperature by a number of degrees in that area in the middle of the summertime. The benefit to that is that on the edges of spring and winter time, it's also putting heat gain there to make the space more usable through the seasons.
Thank you, Councilman Shetty.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, because one time I was granted, Phoenix is a different environment than South Dakota, but it was still probably a 90-degree day, and I went to someone's backyard that had turf, and you couldn't even be on it barefoot. It was just so hot to the touch on a 90-degree day. So I just something to consider make sure we don't overlook some of those scenarios too in this process.
Councilman Danforth.
I want to go back. Is Terry Kelly still with us somewhere by chance?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Terry, I think Councilman Paulson was getting to a topic, and it ended up centering on the availability of people, but making an assumption that you have the people to do your job for this facility. Are you concerned with the estimated $135,000, $140,000 O&M in your budget? I'm going to throw a little caveat in there. Keeping in mind that we're highly likely at least going to be seriously looking at, and I hope we get there, on a new ice facility, indoor ice facility, and what that brings as far as the O&M costs. So where are you at in your whole budget when we consider everything, your ability to support this, and the other things that are being looked at from an O&M standpoint? That's my first question. And then the other one, and maybe that's I don't know whose question this is, but it references in what we got for a document from Heath. It says that Jesse, and in return, Jesse gives the city $1,200. I'm assuming it's not give from the standpoint of ownership, or is it? Is it the use of? It says in this document we got, it says that Jesse gives the city. To me, that's possessive. So my question is it the use of that 1,200 square feet, and is that?
The MOU states it's a 99-year lease with $1 a year, so you don't have to take care of the roof, the exterior, the glass, anything like that, doors, mechanisms, anything like that. That's all provided. The only thing it says in the MOU is you take care of the interior upkeep of it.
Is there a day that dollar is due, Jesse? That $1 we owe you?
Well, I like to have it in cash, a crisp dollar bill, if you would. If I can carry it 90 days, same as cash. Other than that, it's like I think 3.5% is what I was at.
So back to Terry Kelly on the overall O&M when we consider other things. Well, currently what we're doing and struggle with. Probability of a new indoor ice facility with a very significant O&M budget, and then now this one. I would really like to, Terry, get your understanding of where you're at with that.
That's where I'm at. I played a big role in developing these numbers. I can't even say it's an assumption. It would be an assumption of mine that this would have to be, say with ice, the 157 would have to be an additional transfer, whether that be from general or BBB. The existing budget could not absorb these additional dollars. We're already seeing shortcomings in our current operation, let alone take on this debt within our current transfer. Right now we get, I believe it's, in Finance Officer Bob Z can help me, but I believe it's 1.9 general fund transfer and 250,000 from BBB on top of our revenues to balance our budget. And we are slightly unbalanced now. I think we started this year about 300,000 out of our unrestricted cash to balance. So short answer is no, this would have to be additional dollars coming from general or BBB.
I'd
Just-
also,
just-
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
You're good.
I do just want to share, and Kristen can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the $500,000 from the community foundation would be considered as revenue for the project, so that will offset the O&M, the future O&M costs, at least for the next 10 years.
City Attorney Roby, you have your hand up. Would you like to comment?
I guess not to jump around here, but just back previously to the question to Jesse regarding the space. I know we can flesh this out further. It was also, Jesse and I had also talked at one point about potentially having that be condoed out and the city actually is taking ownership outright. So that would be another option to explore.
Thank you. Councilman Vilhauer.
Two questions. First, I'll direct towards our finance officer, Kristen Bobzien. Kristen, help me recall the bond, the $15 million that we bonded for here earlier this year. Was this project included as part of that? It was not. Okay. That's all I need to know on that one. I guess secondly, then, what's the end game tonight in this discussion? Where are we going? What's our goal to end up? Because I know we're running out of time and another topic to come up here.
Actually, thank you very much for that, Councilman Vilhauer. The chair was going to ask to see if we could find some sort of consensus as far as how we're going forward. But first, let our finance officer answer the first question, or are you okay with that? I mean, everything good?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just, on the record, no, the 15 million that we just went out for does not include the park.
Okay. So the options, what we are considering tonight, again, option one, the foundation plaza with no ice. That means no synthetic turf, no plan for ice in the future. It doesn't completely rule it out. Option number two is foundation plaza with ice, built in immediately. Option number three is foundation plaza with the, let's say, the add-ons put in at first for the possibility of ice coming in the future. So option one, no ice. Option two, ice. Option three, ice in the future. So the chair would like to see, just looking around, who would, as your first choice, make option number one. No ice. This is no ice. Councilman Shetty?
But still open to, I know it would cost 35, 40,000 more potentially, still open to the ice down the road, but I'd be for currently no ice. So we can just work out some of these other details.
Yeah, it would just have to come back. It would,
Yeah.
take a little bit of an extra cost, but you could engineer it and it would happen. So,
Mr. Mayor,
Public Works Director Heath Van Nuy.
to Councilman Shetty's point, I thought I'd just point out a point of clarity there. With the no ice versus the future ice options, and John can maybe speak to this, I think if the intent is that we have ice 5-10 years down the road, we're probably better suited going with that future ice option, or that $200,000 today will cost us exponentially more 5 to 10 years down the road to add that ice in later on. I just wanted to make that point of clarity so everybody was of that understanding why we have that no ice and future ice option.
Thank you very much, Heath. So, Councilman Danforth?
Can I just give an explanation as to why I raised my
Of
hand
course.
for that
Actually,
one,
I
if
think
could?
the public would like to hear what our minds are on this.
This has been a tough one for me because I will be honest, I've had very little support for this park from the public. And I can understand what we want to do and why we want to do it in regards to the building of a park. I think it does facilitate the activities that have taken place and are taking place uptown. I know with Mr. Craig, at least there was an understanding, from what I gather, that a park would be put in place. I don't know if that was ever formalized per se in regards to a contract or commitment. But so with that, I personally would support the park. The location in my mind is not the best, but we only got so many options for that. Would I have concerns about going beyond the park into the ice is, number one, the cost of it, getting it there, and number two, I'm very concerned about the O&M costs on an ongoing basis. That is a lot of money, especially when we're hopeful and highly probable of spending a lot of money on a new indoor facility that I think people will gravitate to. And to me, the third option, in my opinion, should be off the table. We're either going to do it or you're not going to do it. I think to go halfway right now with never knowing if you're going to do it, I think you should. You just bite the bullet if and when that ever happens. But not only am I concerned about our overall capital spending and the things that we're looking at, when we look at all of them, and we had a very good meeting here a while back to discuss those. I am concerned about that as a whole, and so $1 million in my mind is still very important. And Amanda, if I'm correcting here, you said that the $500,000 from the foundation really is an offset to our expenses. That means the $2.5 million is on our plate, not $2 million, right? So my deal is this: it's the extra capital money that I think is best used elsewhere, and very concerned about the O&M costs on an ongoing basis to support ICE. And for that reason, I want to go back to the basics of what this conversation started 10 years ago, probably 7, 8 years ago, and that was a green space uptown with a stage type place to kind of take the place. And that's where I'm at with it, and that's the reason why I voted or indicated where my position is.
Thank you. Councilman Tupper.
I just want to touch base and kind of, just like Councilman Danforth just did, I've sat through all the charrettes. I've sat through all the downtown meetings, visited, spent a lot of time in downtown Sioux Falls with those people. I'm a true believer that this park is very, very important to the community, but I got to agree with Councilman Danforth on the overall cost. I just can't honestly say I could go for the ice on it when we've been talking to the community for over 20 years to try to get a new ice arena. And now we're going to put this in front of that. And I totally support the park, but I would totally will support it without the ice. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Bueller.
Thank you, Mayor. Just like to kind of clarify a couple of things. As far as my involvement with this committee, unfortunately, I did not stay on that committee for very long. I was on it for a short period of time. I see that this thing has evolved to a much greater, with a lot more amenities than originally was anticipated. Like I heard somebody say, it was originally going to be a venue and maybe some green space for people to sit down that we could use for entertainment. I want to thank the committee for all the work, all the effort they put into this, but this thing has morphed into a really large, expensive project, more so than we had originally anticipated. And I agree. I think the O&M, when we see those figures, that kind of wakes you up a little bit, and you rethink whether or not you want to do some of these things. I have questions about some of the design issues, and that's for another time. But that's where I think we've got an issue. I think we're the ones who have to, at the end of the day, set budgets, and we have to look at these costs. And I was very much surprised at the overall expense, the overall costs that came about with the O&M and the capital investment that we'd have to make in this. And it's going to be an ongoing expense. And then kind of back to Colin's comment, we keep adding and adding and adding things, responsibilities to the Park and Rec Department. And as a liaison, I see these things, and we are going to have to make some significant investments in resources for the Park and Rec Department moving forward. I think we need to do that now, but this certainly would add a lot more burden to that group. So, I support having the park. But I do not, and I will not support the ice or even installing the infrastructure to develop ice down the road.
Thank you very much. Any further comments? I would just like to add on. I have struggled to get to be a strong proponent of the park, but I do see what parks can do to the downtowns of other communities in this area, and they do add value. They do bring people. And part of me says, well, but we're not Sioux Falls or we're not Rapid City. We don't have that number of people or the same, the same community, the same economic structure. But here's the deal. We can be the best Watertown we can be, and starting to look forward and adding these quality of life structures is what we want in Watertown. We want to be this community going forward. We need to have that vision. We can discuss as to what level of vision that is going to be, and that's our purview, that's our right, that's our responsibility. So I have finally gotten on board as a proponent of the park because I believe in this community and I believe in the future of this community, and I'm going to invest in that future. So I just would like to encourage the public out there to also get on board, because I have heard the comments, well, you can build a $2 million park, but you can't fix my pothole. It's a legitimate question. I will say that our city manager and our finance officer and I have had discussions about this, and we are not blind to these. We will come forward with a plan also on roads. We will never forget those. That's also probably our number one infrastructure. The park is another quality of life infrastructure, but it's not an either or option ever with Watertown. I always look at Watertown as an all-in. Let's do whatever we can for as many people as we can and invest in the future. So I would also, along with the majority of council, support option number 1, but I want to go through that one more time unless anyone has any more comments. So again, option 1, no ice. Option 2, ice. Option 3, ice in the future. So all those in favor of option 1, no ice. Option 2, thank you very much for all of the council, but to our staff and Mr. Jacobson at Confluence, we have a consensus of the majority of us would like to go forward with option number 1.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to item B, the Ice Arena project and funding. Oh, sorry.
Actually, first, I emailed all of the elected officials a copy of the PowerPoint that I'd like to have Mitch pull up, because some of these charts and graphs are going to be a little hard to read on the screen. So if you want to pull it up on your computer. But before we dive deep into the ice arena itself, our finance director is going to do what she did at Councilman Danforth's request and walk through all of these capital projects that we have on the books right now and how that is going to impact future spending. And as we dive into the ICE project, looking at potentially bonding for that, how a bond would impact future debt capacities as well. So I will turn that over to Kristen and let her work her magic, and feel free to pepper her with questions because I will not have the answers.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Mayor. So I will be going over quite a bit of information, and if you do have questions, it's probably best to try to stop me. Otherwise, it'll probably get a little too deep. So the very first slide that we're going to look at, and I want to let the public know too, and we'll be discussing, the city of Watertown has really essentially kind of like 2 pots of money. We talk about our general fund, which is our first penny, and then we talk about our capital improvement fund, which is our second penny. So these discussions focus on our capital improvement fund, which is our second penny sales tax. That one is by ordinance, has its own little bit of regulations on what it can be used for. That's improvements, also purchases of ambulance, fire trucks, and there's a few other things, debt payments, and then transfers to our E911 fund. So just as we kind of start to talk about that. So this very first slide that we're looking at, this is our current debt as we stand today. This is everything that is the responsibility of the second penny to pay for. We have our 2020 bonds that were for our wellness center and our softball complex. Then we had our bonds from the library. There's a few tiny SRF loans. Those were for some of our stormwater improvement projects that we went for state funding for. Then we also have the 2021 bonds. When it shows the 7.5 million, the city did go out for the resolution for the 15 million. As of today, we have only taken 7.5 million. So this is currently as we sit. If we look at this, and you can kind of toggle between this and then the next one shows the graph. Essentially what this shows, as I look at it, is that as we move into year 2026 is when we start to feel more of that comfort level. From about 2021 to 2026, what it shows me is that we'll need to plan strategically because those revenue sources, 36% currently is being designated as debt. So that's a little bit kind of, you can see when you get to 2020, looks like 2027, the library's bond is going to drop off, and that gives us that little bit of extra comfort in terms of this. When we also looked at the chart previously, the column where it projected the revenues, I used a very conservative revenue projection of 2% growth of sales tax. I don't think we'll sit at 2% for the next 30 years. I hope we don't. We'll have our good and our bad years, but that's just to show us a very conservative amount.
Councilman Vilhauer, I'm going to just make it so that, Kristen, if you see someone asking a question, you handle it, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
2% growth, what's your base though? What are you starting out at, 8 million or what?
It's starting at the 8.3.
Okay.
Which is what I project that we'll receive this year.
Thank you.
So, and then it's growing from there. So this kind of shows where we're at currently. So if we go to the next chart, so this one right here. So this is if the city would go out for an additional 15 million. Not only is it adding in the next 7.5 million that we talked about for the street facility, but also a full additional 15 million for the ice arena project. The biggest things that I can show and probably talk about right here is if we look at the available sales tax revenue after debt, we've got a window of time where I don't want to say that it's scary, but it's going to take some very good planning on our part. 2022 to about 2026 has only between 4 and 5 million worth of revenue available. Now that's like that, like I said, if we would only see 2% growth. We try to spend around $3 to $3.5 million on our street improvements. I know our goal is to try to get a little bit higher. So that's where this comes into that really good planning. The other thing that the city spends capital improvement fund money on is our recreation improvements. So when I talk about that it's a little scary here, it's more just the fact that we have to plan, we have to prioritize what we want to do. We do at the city also receive STP funds from the state that averages around 700 to 800,000 annually, which is designated for those street improvement projects. So if we're just looking at our sales tax revenue, okay, we're there. But if we add in our STP funds, this starts to look a little bit better. So when I look at it from the finance side, if we can stick between the 35 and 40% of our debt to revenue ratio, that is truly the comfort zone. That is where we can kind of start to do our breath of fresh air moment. So you can see that that happens around that year 2027 here. And then by the time we've gotten ourselves to 2030, we're kind of back to where we normally would be. Mike, did you have a question?
This doesn't, when, Kristen, as we've talked about this, you know, assuming all the things that we have all talked about and we have on the table, I can't envision anything extremely large in regards to projects, with the exception of an east side, I'm going to call it fire station, I'm not sure what you'd call it. Where does, you know, that's not built into these numbers, right?
That is not built into these, yep.
All right, and then, so the other question is, when we look at those numbers on the far right, the 4 or 5 years that you're concerned with, what's our greatest risk there? I mean, the unknown, we can't project what that might be. But of the known items, the things like fire trucks and ambulances and equipment, and we talked about, Colin made a really good comment earlier, because I'm right on board with that, and that is our parks. We have a lot of great assets, but we just haven't put the resources to them.
Right.
So your numbers here, what does it enable us to do, or what do we have to really be concerned with in regards to those items? First and foremost to me is police vehicles, fire trucks, ambulances.
Mm-hmm.
Going beyond that, we obviously know we got street equipment, park and rec equipment. What does this do to us there?
So really, in terms of the street equipment, the police cars, it's nothing, because that's a separate pot of money. So these funds they can't be used for that. So really what this does is it makes us have to really design and think about what we're going to do in terms of our street projects, which ones we pick for our milling and overlay, which ones we pick to engineering decides needs to be looked at. The other group, the group that uses the biggest pot from the CIP fund is our recreation improvements. That's where we've done our animal care facility out of. That's where we've done our rec trail program out of. So those are really the two areas that the most part, the true spending is. It's between our recreation facility improvements, parks projects, golf course improvements, and then truly the street and the stormwater. That's what this fund is. So when we look at those next 5 to 6 years, that's when I say it doesn't make me scared to see what we have. It's just going to take, where's our priorities? What do we want to do? How do those STP funds come in? And then we kind of have to plan it.
If I can, Kristen, one follow-up question on that. What does that number do then in regards to our ability to better fund our road maintenance? I think the mayor had mentioned that Amanda and him and you have been talking about that. What does that mean in regards to these numbers for our ability to do that versus kind of just staying what we have been doing?
Well, I guess I'll probably lean a little bit on Heath in this question as well with the streets. I think the one thing that we'll have to do over the next 5 years, not only funding is really important, but making sure that the project is able to get done within a season. You could have $6 million to throw at it, but if you don't have the ability to do $6 million worth of work. So that might even be one of those conversations where, maybe 2022 is a heavy street improvement year, and then the next year is where the parks improvements come in. So I think what it says is it's really that planning of your funding and having the engineering department kind of give us some direction of what is a good plan, what does it look like to do our streets. But having an additional, if you took the $4 million in 2022 and you added 700 to 800,000, that makes us feel even better. Right now we're averaging between 3 and 3.5 million just in streets. I don't know where Heath would want that number to get to, or where he thinks it's feasible that we could get accomplished in a season. I don't know if Heath wants to chime in on that, where he would like his budget to be. But that's kind of what it looks like for the 5 years.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if that's appropriate. According to our pavement management study that was performed in 2017, we're on a pretty good track if we're spending about, I believe it was 3.6 million. We've budgeted since 2017 less than that, and that's okay too. It put us on a little bit different track, obviously, to accomplish our pavement management goals. And I believe we've been somewhere between 2.5 and 3 the last few years. This year, I think we bumped a little higher, and then in 22's budget, we're pushing to hit almost that 3.6 million. And that is including all the street improvement projects, that the neighborhood reconstruction projects, the 10th Avenue North reconstruction type of projects, but also the mill and overlay type of work. There are a handful of other things in that CIP that's not included in that 3.6, which would include drainage improvements, for example, miscellaneous concrete repairs throughout town, or sidewalk, curb and gutter, concrete patching type of work. So over and above that 3.6, engineering is usually budgeting, or will be budgeting, proposing probably closer to 4 in totality, maybe 4.5 this next year. So I guess my answer to you that question would be is, what does TK's wish list look like on the park and rec side of things, and how do we make those mesh well together, looking at these numbers for the next few years? Because we can obviously whittle back our request, and he could do the same, and I suppose it just all boil down to where our priorities lie and what it is we want to see done. But we're comfortable, we're energized about the numbers we're proposing for next year, just based on all the street talk on street improvements, and but we definitely want to work in hand with the park and rec side of things too.
I'd just like to chime in that this chart here, so it shows $15 million in debt for a potential ice arena. This assumes that we would use $5.8 million in cash reserves for the construction of an ice arena as well. Now, we don't have a hard and fast number yet on what we're looking at for total cost of the arena. The next couple of slides, Kristen's going to talk about, $20 million worth of debt and using that 5.8 for O&M and to pay debt for debt service. And so those are the things just to be cognizant of.
Thank you, Amanda. So we'll go one more, Mitch. Okay, so this is, as Amanda was referring to, this is what it would look like if we went out for $20 million in debt. What you can see is really over that same 5-year span, there's not a lot of difference between an additional $5 million when you spread it out over a 30-year bond. And to that point, with our current cash that we have of the 5.8, my suggestion would be that not only do we, as we talk about, a lot of concern has been given towards the operational side of many of these projects that happen, with that cash being available. I think a good use of that money would be a portion to go to the operating, to make sure for those first couple years until we know what it looks like, till we have that kind of under our belt, and to use that cash for that, and then also to help offset some of these debt payments that the Capital Improvement Fund is taking on, which then helps with that planning of our street projects and some of our other rec projects. Like I said, I think the real thing that I'm trying to express is that it is nothing to be scared of, or it's not that we can't do it. I will say too, these projects have been here for 10 years. This is the lowest. This is with an average coupon of 3%, which is the lowest we've probably been able to see for a long time. So debt is, it costs money, but it's also a good time versus if we were sitting out here at 5%. So really that 5 to 6 year window is going to take strategic planning from the council, from staff, to really prioritize what do we want to do, how do we want to do it. So.
Additionally, neither of those numbers, the 15 or the 20 million, account for any naming rights or any donations.
Yes.
This is just if we're paying for the whole thing up front.
For the whole thing, yep. Glenn?
Kristen, I just want to follow up on the point that Councilman Danforth raised. This is, your numbers are allowing for everything that we currently have talked about recently. Haven't included the fire station, I understand that, but this does include, the park, the city hall, city hall project, the street department facility. So this is encompassing, along with the ice arena, obviously, this is encompassing everything. I guess I like to follow what Mayor Holeen said a while ago. This is the prime time for us as a community to get these projects done and move forward. The interest rate's 60-year low, somewhere thereabouts, that, we're relying upon your comfort level, but I see these percentages and numbers too, and they don't cause me any undue concern. But to me, this is the time to strike on these projects and get them done and get them off our plate and move forward.
The only other, so I did prior kind of go in and I looked. We do have our long-term capital plan. It's out on the website, and we do go through that. The East Fire Station is one of them. There's only one other project, and that is the phosphorus removal plant that is in the plan that's been discussed. That one is one that I think there's a little bit more research and a little bit more understanding of what that looks like. But in terms of our large projects, no, this is kind of it. And these all have been sitting in our long-term capital plan for quite a few years between City Hall, street facility, ice arena. They've all been sitting out there kind of waiting. Like I said, as the one that kind of looks at the numbers all the time, the 35 to 40% is kind of your comfort of the debt ratio. But really what the chart shows is when you look at it, you start to get your comfort back about 2027, which I know sounds like a long time, but I feel like 2021 came pretty fast. So I really think it's that 5-year window where we just have to watch what we're doing, and it's just really good, solid planning and prioritizing on our part.
If you have a question for our finance officer, just go
Go ahead,
ahead and
Dan.
ask her directly. Yep.
I can let her finish, actually, because I have a question to
good.
follow up with, so.
Okay, I think that's it, unless anybody else.
Just
Randy?
a quick thought on that was, is it possible to have a work session on the street department and the Parks and Rec department as far as to really make an educated decision on this, so we can see a breakdown of how it works, how the costs flow, and I just would recommend, I would request that for myself personally.
One thing that we had suggested was doing a work session in September around city finances just as a whole. Some of this will get flushed out during the budget process as well. But as we get, further through those discussions, we can have a separate conversation around the street facility if you like. Yeah, we can tie that into any of those.
Mike, did you have one more?
Is it okay if I ask Mr. Strasburg a question? Yes. Dick, what are you seeing on larger projects like this? If we go back in time a year or 2 years when, well, let's say that was the normal times, what are you seeing right now in general in regards to average cost differences between a year or 2 years ago versus where we're at today in this market?
I guess the way I'd respond to that would be, I've been in the business 35 years, and it's been more or less 3% most of that time. It went up a little bit, I'd say, in 2000, kind of around the last recession. We went through some issues with steel and so on, but it's been more or less 3%, and it kind of spiked up with a few exceptions. The last couple of years, what we've seen is I've never seen before. It is just a number of factors are coming together, and the response to COVID and the recovery of that have caused pricing to be just really volatile. So I think there's a debate right now within our industry, is this a transitory type of blip with cost escalation, or is this something that's will sustain out for quite a few years? So I think the good news is that you're not buying. An ice arena has relatively few components to it compared to some building types. So it's steel and concrete and equipment, So it doesn't hit it as much as some might.
So roughly, are we this last year, if you took a project and compared it, is it running at a 10% versus a 3% average? Is it running at 15?
I don't think it's quite up that. It might be 5 to 7%. But this next year is what the question is, is what it's going to do this next year. And I don't know that we'd say it's 5 to 7. Right now we're using, we've got one project right now where we're looking at a bond on it, and we're using 15%. Because it's out another, it's still, we'd be out probably 9 to 12 months before they would do the bond. So locking in on it, and that's one of the things we push on this project, is to lock in on some of these pricing, like steel, lock in sooner rather than later.
Good conversation. Mayor Olin has turned the gavel over to me for the time being. We are running up against our regular council meeting start time. So I would like to continue this conversation if we could at the kickoff of our regular council meeting. Mr. Strasburg, you're here, so we would definitely want to hear from you. So at this point, I would adjourn us for the time being and reconvene in about 5 minutes then. So we're adjourned.